Picture yourself trying to manage the most bewildering bathroom scenario imaginable, all while dressed in what can only be described as a feat of structural design. You're ensnared in layers of garments that could comfortably house a small family. Your torso is cinched into a corset so tight, breathing deeply becomes a fantasy, not a function. Around you, society's elite hover in lace and lace-up boots, ready to swoon at the mere suggestion of nature's call. Today, we're plunging into one of history's most curious conundrums, how Victorian women managed everyday biological needs while clad in ensembles that look more like architecture than attire. And let me tell you, their solutions were as clever as they were astonishing. But before we unravel this fabric-laden mystery of chamber pots and cloak-and-dagger hygiene tricks, tell me, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'm continually fascinated by how history brings people together across oceans and time zones. And if you're enjoying this descent into the quirky corners of the past, hit that subscribe button. We got countless untold stories yet to explore. Now, let's take a leap into a world where using the bathroom wasn't just inconvenient. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, demanding precision, secrecy, and style. The act of dressing each morning for a Victorian lady was no small affair. It was a mission. She began with a lightweight chemise, essentially a slip, worn to safeguard her expensive garments from sweat and oils. Next came the corset, laced to reshape, not just support. These weren't gentle support garments. Some women had their ribs permanently altered over time due to chronic tight lacing. On top of this were petticoats. Not one, not two, but sometimes up to half a dozen. These added bulk, silhouette, and a floating grace, but also unbearable heat and weight. The crowning piece? The crinoline, a cage-like apparatus crafted of metal hoops suspended in vertical tapes of fabric. It could span 6 feet across, forcing the wearer to shuffle sideways through doorways and maneuver chairs with military precision. These women weren't just wearing clothes. They were moving in mobile steel frameworks. And in this fabric fortress, they had to perform every part of daily life, including bathroom visits. This architectural attire meant one thing: basic bodily functions had to become high art. The solution was a chamber pot, an innocuous object turned vital life tool. Women's chamber pots were not the simple buckets you might imagine. They were carefully shaped with elongated ovals and sloping interiors, enabling them to slide discreetly under layers of fabric. High-end versions had well-fitted lids, not just to contain scent, but to signal staff whether the pot needed attention. In affluent homes, these necessities were hidden in plain sight. Armchairs had secret compartments. Lavish cabinets held multiple pots. Even commodes were masterpieces of deception, cloaked in decorative wooden carvings. Servants were the quiet operators of the shadow network, slipping through stately homes, collecting, emptying, and cleaning the pots without drawing attention. They were like stagehands in a silent play, ensuring everything ran without interruption. And the process itself? A marvel of choreography. A woman couldn't just hike up her skirts and squat. We're talking about 20-plus pounds of fabric, boning, and lace. She needed strategy. She needed spatial awareness. She needed to practically perform interpretive dance. The chamber pot was eased underneath. She'd adjust herself with careful hand movements, arrange her layers like curtains over a stage, and carry out her business without disrobing a single thread. And if she was at a ball, well, the operation became even more discreet. Grand mansions had rooms known as retiring rooms, essentially Victorian ladies' lounges with a singular purpose. Maids, trained for this duty, assisted with lifting layers, positioning pots, and restoring everything to perfect order. The whole process had to be faster than a waltz and subtler than a whisper. These women were elegance incarnate. But behind the scenes, they were logistics geniuses. And here's a detail that may surprise you. For much of this period, women didn't wear what we consider traditional underwear. That's right. All those skirts and crinolines were considered enough to preserve modesty. But the wind had other plans. As the metal-framed crinolines grew wider, gusts of wind caused a spectacle. Picture a crowded street, and suddenly a woman's entire dress is turned inside out, like a parasol flipping backward. It was comedic, it was mortifying, and it was frequent. The solution? A new type of undergarment that was both modest and practical, split-crotch drawers. These were 2 separate leg coverings connected only at the waist. The middle remained open, ingeniously allowing bathroom use without removal. They combined decorum with practicality and were a quiet revolution in female fashion. Victorian bathroom logistics didn't stop with clothes. Let's talk about toilet paper, or rather, the lack thereof. Modern toilet paper didn't become widespread until late in the 19th century. Before that, people used what they had on hand: old newspaper, pages from catalogs, even smooth stones or shells in earlier centuries. But upper-class women had options. They used reusable cloths made of soft linen, which were washed and rotated with household laundry. But even these had to be carefully stored, laundered, and sometimes discreetly transported. Then there was a monthly complication: menstruation, another invisible but omnipresent challenge Victorian women faced. The period solution of the time: homemade cloth pads, paired with a harness-like contraption called a T-bandage. This was a belt worn around the waist with a strap between the legs, securing absorbent materials in place. Women used strips of soft rags, cotton batting, even dried moss or lamb's wool. On heavy days, some had to change these materials up to 15 times. All of this had to be handled beneath voluminous skirts, without noise or complaint, and often without help. Menstruation was never openly discussed, not even between mothers and daughters. Silence was golden, and discretion was sacred. Meanwhile, laundering garments was another minefield. Those enormous dresses, covered in beads, lace, and embroidery, couldn't be washed regularly. In many homes, large-scale washing happened just once or twice a year in what were called great wash days. The dresses were maintained by brushing, airing out, and applying powders to absorb odors. Only the layers touching the body, the shift, corset liners, and drawers, were washed routinely. These items served a protective shield for the outer garments and were considered indispensable for hygiene. Powdered secrets and chambered solutions. Victorian society didn't just operate on rules of fashion. It thrived on invisible systems of etiquette, privacy, and silent cooperation. Even public sanitation reflected this elaborate dance of propriety. The guard-rope system, carried over from medieval times, still lingered in older buildings. This meant certain upper floors had built-in holes through which waste could be dropped directly into the streets below. And yes, pedestrians risked being hit with surprise offerings from above. The warning cry "Gardez Lo," French for "watch out for the water," was used by those dumping waste. It was both a social courtesy and a real-time survival warning. Fascinatingly, waste wasn't always seen as waste. During wartime, especially, government collectors gathered urine, which contained ammonia, an ingredient crucial in producing saltpeter used for making gunpowder. Your personal byproducts could literally help fund a war. Victorian attitudes toward privacy would strike many modern people as baffling. In many households, family members routinely used chamber pots in each other's presence. Among the gentry, men would casually step outside during garden parties to relieve themselves among the hedges, no fanfare needed. Despite these open habits in private, public discussion of such matters was taboo, especially for women. This sharp divide between what was done and what could be spoken about is one of the strangest dualities of the era. Victorian women pulled off something extraordinary. They endured constant discomfort and logistical challenges, yet they did so with grace, never betraying the strain behind their smiles. Imagine going to a formal dinner party. You're tightly laced into a corset. You're wearing 30 pounds of fabric. You can't bend easily, you're warm, and you're sipping tea. You need to use the bathroom. But to do so, you must navigate layered garments, signal a maid without saying a word, and hope the retiring room isn't full. Yet somehow, these women did it. Repeatedly, they learned to master timing, body signals, fluid intake, and movement control like seasoned professionals. They also built underground knowledge networks. Mothers passed down bathroom strategies and clothing hacks to daughters. Maids knew the unspoken cues from their mistresses. Female friends shared coded phrases at dances and teas to discreetly excuse themselves. These were the original life hacks, and they were essential. Behind all this was an enormous workforce. Wealthy women had personal maids, laundresses, dressmakers, and sometimes even servants whose main role was to manage wardrobe maintenance. Every gown had to be cleaned, repaired, stored, and sometimes modified. Corsets had to be relaced, undergarments laundered. Crinolines had to be reshaped. The labor involved in keeping a Victorian woman public ready was staggering. Ironically, these burdens may have paved the way for subtle feminist advances. Because fashion was so physically restrictive, many upper-class women stayed home more, focused on the domestic realm, or pursued intellectual hobbies like writing, drawing, or reading. In fact, the impracticality of fashion pushed women towards stillness, but that stillness birthed literature, correspondence, and activism. As time moved forward, so did fashion. Crinolines gave way to bustles, smaller, more manageable silhouettes that emphasized the rear rather than expanding the entire lower body. With bicycles becoming popular, women began demanding more functional attire. By the turn of the 20th century, especially after World War I, practicality began to reign. Women joined the workforce in droves, and fashion responded accordingly. Corsets loosened. Hemlines rose. Crinolines were quietly buried with the past. Yet the story of how Victorian women managed bathroom challenges is more than just historical trivia. It's a reflection of human adaptability, of how people can maintain poise under pressure, elegance under duress, and ingenuity in the face of absurdity. These women developed systems not out of luxury, but necessity. They didn't complain. They innovated, and they left a legacy. Their determination influenced more than just plumbing and fashion. It helped usher in sanitation systems, modern undergarments, gendered spaces like women's restrooms, and even cultural shift around bodily autonomy. So next time you step into a bathroom without a second thought or slip into stretchable clothing, think of them, the women who navigated a world of hoops, lace, and whispered secrets just to do what we now take for granted. Because behind every elegant Victorian silhouette was a mastermind of logistics, grace, and willpower.